There is a moment that happens dozens of times a day, a moment you have experienced so often that you no longer notice it. A stranger sits across from you on the train. A colleague enters the meeting room. A friend answers the phone with a tone that is slightly off. In that first second, before any words are exchanged, before the conscious mind has time to construct a story or a defense, something passes between you. A flicker of information. A pulse of recognition. The body knows before the mind catches up. Most people ignore this moment. They bury it under small talk, under assumptions, under the comforting narrative that people are basically the same, basically good, basically transparent. They wait for words to tell them what is happening, not realizing that words are the last and least reliable layer of human communication. By the time someone speaks, they have already told you everything. If you knew how to look, this is not about manipulation. It is not about cold reading techniques used by stage performers or the psychological tricks sold in pop science books. It is about something older and more fundamental, the capacity to see another human being as they actually are in the instant of encounter before the masks descend and the performance begins. The Greeks called it metis, the practical intelligence that operates faster than deliberation. Modern psychology calls it thin slicing, the ability to make accurate judgments from minimal information. But whatever name you give it, the skill is the same: the art of reading what is present before it is hidden. What follows is not a system. Systems fail because people are not systems. What follows is a set of orientations, ways of attending to the human presence that reveal what is usually concealed. These orientations require practice, but more than practice, they require a shift in how you relate to other people. You must stop trying to understand them and start allowing yourself to see them. The difference is crucial. Understanding is a cognitive act, slow and deliberate. Seeing is perceptual, immediate, prior to thought. The instant read happens in seeing, not in understanding. The architecture of first impressions. The human brain is wired for instant assessment. In the environment where our species evolved, the ability to distinguish friend from foe, threat from opportunity, in a fraction of a second was the difference between survival and death. This capacity did not disappear when we moved to cities and offices. It remains active, operating below conscious awareness, processing thousands of microsignals that never reach the level of verbal thought. Research in social psychology confirms what intuition has always known. Studies of thin slicing by Nalini Ambedi and Robert Rosenthal demonstrate that observers can make accurate judgments about personality, competence, and even professional effectiveness from silent video clips lasting mere seconds. The accuracy does not improve with more information. Often it degrades. The first impression captures something essential that prolonged exposure obscures with noise. But most first impressions are wrong in the specifics even when they are right in the general. You sense that someone is hostile, but you mistake the source of the hostility. You feel that someone is trustworthy, but you cannot say why. The instant read is not about conclusions. It is about data. It is about registering what is present without immediately translating it into a narrative. The body is the primary text. Before anyone speaks, their body has been speaking for hours, for years, for a lifetime. Posture is not a position. It is a history. The shoulders that curve forward are not merely slouched. They are the physical record of someone who has learned to make themselves small, who has been punished for taking up space, who carries the expectation of diminishment in their very bones, the chin that lifts too high, the neck that elongates, the gaze that skims over others without landing. These are not random. They are the body performing a story about power, about defense, about the need to be seen as more than one feels. But the body is also immediate. It responds to the present moment faster than conscious intention can direct it. When someone enters a room, watch what happens before they compose themselves. The micro-adjustment of the shoulders, the quick scan of the space, the unconscious orientation toward or away from the center of attention. These are the true signals, the ones that precede the performance. The performance is what they want you to see. The pre-performance is who they are. Breathing is the most honest signal. The respiratory system is partially under voluntary control, but its deeper patterns reflect emotional states that the conscious mind may not acknowledge. The person who holds their breath slightly when speaking of a particular topic is revealing a tension they may not name. The person whose breathing accelerates in your presence is responding to you with an intensity they may not admit. The person who breathes slowly, deeply from the diaphragm has either mastered their nervous system or has little to be nervous about. Both are information. The eyes are not windows to the soul. They are instruments of survival, evolved to gather information and to conceal it. But they cannot conceal everything. The direction of gaze, the duration of contact, the pattern of blinking, these are governed by systems older and more honest than speech. The person who maintains eye contact too long is performing dominance or seeking connection. They cannot ask for it directly. The person who looks away too quickly is avoiding exposure, protecting something they fear you will see. The person whose eyes dart, who scan the environment even while speaking to you, is not fully present, is monitoring for threat or opportunity, is living in a state of vigilance that predates this conversation. But the most revealing aspect of the eyes is what they do when they think no one is watching. The glance of the door when someone feels trapped. The involuntary softening when a particular name is mentioned. The hardening that happens in the microsecond before a smile. These are the moments of truth, the gaps in the performance where the person leaks through. The sound beneath the words. Voice is the most complex signal because it operates on multiple levels simultaneously. The semantic content, the literal meaning of the words, is the least important. The vocal parameters carry the real information: pitch, tempo, volume, timbre, rhythm, the spaces between words. Pitch is the most emotionally revealing. The baseline pitch of a person's voice reflects their physiological state, their tension or relaxation, their sense of safety or threat. When pitch rises under stress, it reveals anxiety that the words may deny. When pitch drops, it signals either calm authority or deliberate suppression of emotion. The person whose voice goes flat, whose pitch loses its natural variation, is often the person who is most dangerous, most controlled, most capable of violence, precisely because they have learned to suppress the signals that would warn others. Tempo reveals cognitive load. The person who speaks rapidly may be excited, anxious, or trying to overwhelm you with information before you can process it. The person who speaks slowly may be thoughtful, manipulative, or struggling to construct a narrative in real time. But the most telling tempo is the one that changes. The acceleration when a sensitive topic is approached. The deceleration when someone is choosing their words with unusual care. The pause that lasts a fraction too long. The silence that fills with unspoken meaning. Volume is about territory. Loud voices claim space, demand attention, assert presence. Quiet voices invite closeness, create intimacy, or conceal weakness. But the person who modulates volume most skillfully is often the most socially intelligent. The one who has learned to calibrate their presence to the situation, to expand or contract as needed. This is not necessarily deception. It is adaptation, but it is information about how the person relates to social space, about their history of being heard or ignored, about their strategy for being seen. The timbre of the voice, the quality that makes it distinctive, is the hardest to fake. It reflects the physical structure of the vocal apparatus, but also the emotional history that has shaped that structure. The voice that carries a permanent rasp may be the voice of someone who has screamed too much, or cried too much, or simply lived in a body that holds tension in the throat. The voice that resonates from the chest projects confidence, or the performance of confidence, or a physical constitution that supports full breathing. The voice that stays in the head, thin and tight, speaks of constriction, of a life lived in vigilance, of energy that cannot descend into the body. The rhythm of speech is the most culturally variable, but also the most personally revealing. Some people speak in bursts, energetic and unspent. Others maintain a steady flow, reliable and sometimes monotonous. The person whose rhythm matches yours, who falls into your cadence without conscious effort, is either deeply attuned or deeply manipulative. The person whose rhythm never changes, who speaks like a metronome regardless of content, has either extraordinary control or extraordinary disconnection from their own emotional state. But the most important vocal signal is the one that happens in the gaps, the breath taken before a difficult admission, the swallow that interrupts a flow of words, the slight tremor that enters a voice trying to be steady. These are the moments when the body overrides the intention, when the truth leaks through the narrative, when you can see what the person is working to conceal. The language of movement. Human movement is not random. It is patterned, habitual, expressive of deep structures of personality that formed long before conscious self-awareness. The way a person walks into a room is a summary of their relationship to the world. The person who enters boldly, who takes up space immediately, who moves as if the environment belongs to them, has either genuine confidence or the performance of confidence that compensates for its absence. The distinction matters, but it is not always immediately apparent. The compensatory boldness often carries a tension, a slight overreach, a quality of demanding rather than occupying. The person who enters cautiously, who reads the room before committing, who finds the edges and the corners, has learned that the world is not safe, that attention is dangerous, that it is better to observe than to be observed. This is not necessarily weakness. It may be the survival strategy of someone who has been punished for visibility, or the tactical approach of someone who has learned that information is power and that the observer often has the advantage. Gesture is the most culturally variable signal, but also the most personally revealing. Some cultures gesture broadly, using the whole body to communicate. Others restrict gesture, keeping communication verbal and contained. Within any cultural frame, the individual's pattern of gesture reveals their relationship to their own expressiveness. The person who gestures with open palms is performing openness, whether genuinely or strategically. The person whose gestures are contained, whose hands stay close to the body, is either controlled, fearful, or operating in a cultural frame that values restraint. But the involuntary gestures are the most telling. The hand that moves toward the face and stops. The self-touch that reveals anxiety or self-soothing. The finger that taps unconsciously. The foot that jiggles. The body that cannot be still. These are not communications in the intentional sense. They are leaks. The body's own language speaking when the mind is occupied elsewhere. Proximity is the most direct signal of social relationship. The distance a person maintains, the angle of their body, whether they orient toward you or away, these are decisions made in the first instant of encounter, often before conscious thought, and they reveal the person's default stance toward others. The person who stands too close, who invades your space without invitation, is performing dominance or seeking intimacy they have not earned. The person who maintains excessive distance is either fearful, disdainful, or operating from a cultural framework with different proxemic norms. The angle of the body is particularly revealing. Frontal orientation, facing someone directly, is either engagement or confrontation. Angled orientation, turning slightly away, is either casual comfort or deliberate distancing. The person who angles toward you while maintaining eye contact is offering something. The person who angles away while maintaining eye contact is withholding something. Both are information, the face and its betrayals. The face is the most studied and the most deceptive of all human signals. We have evolved elaborate musculature for facial expression precisely because expression is so important for social life, and we have evolved equally elaborate capacity for controlling that expression precisely because uncontrolled expression is dangerous. The face is a battleground between honesty and strategy, between what we feel and what we want others to think we feel. Paul Ekman's research on facial expressions identified universal patterns, the basic emotions of happiness, sadness, anger, fear, disgust, and surprise that appear across cultures in recognizable forms. But Ekman also identified the micro-expression, the facial movement that lasts only a fraction of a second, too brief for conscious control. It reveals the true emotional response before the mask descends. These micro-expressions are the holy grail of instant reading, the moments when the face tells the truth despite the person's best efforts. But micro-expressions are rare and difficult to catch without training. More accessible is the pattern of facial control itself. The person whose face is constantly animated, who shows every emotion immediately and fully, is either unusually honest or unusually performative, and the distinction requires context to determine. The person whose face is rigid, whose expressions seem delayed or calculated, is exerting control, managing impressions, living behind a mask that may have become so habitual they no longer notice it. The eyes, as mentioned, are the most expressive part of the face, but the mouth is the most controlled. We learn early to manage our mouths, to smile when we are unhappy, to compress our lips when we are angry, to shape our mouths into expressions that serve our purposes. The genuine smile, the Duquesne smile, involves not just the mouth but the eyes, the muscles around the orbit that are difficult to contract voluntarily. The fake smile is a mouth without eyes, a performance of happiness that the rest of the face does not support. The forehead is the most honest part of the face, because it is the least controlled. The brow that furrows in concentration, the forehead that smooths in relaxation, the tension that appears between the eyebrows. These are harder to manage than the mouth, and therefore more revealing. The person whose forehead is constantly tense is carrying a burden of worry or effort that their mouth may deny. The overall pattern of facial movement is more revealing than any single expression. Some faces move constantly, responding to every stimulus with visible reaction. Others remain still, processing internally what others express externally. Neither is better. Both are information. The responsive face may be emotionally open or emotionally dependent, seeking connection through constant signaling. The still face may be emotionally controlled or emotionally absent, having learned that expression is dangerous or pointless. The context that creates the person. No signal can be read in isolation. The same posture that indicates confidence in one context indicates defensiveness in another. The same silence that means thoughtfulness in one relationship means hostility in another. The instant read is not about decoding universal symbols. It is about registering the person in their situation, understanding how they are responding to this specific moment, this specific relationship, this specific history. The most important context is the person's history with power. Have they been rewarded for visibility or punished for it? Have they learned that the world is generous or that it is withholding? These lessons are written in the body, in the voice, in the patterns of movement and expression that formed over years of interaction. The person who flinches slightly when someone raises their voice carries a history of violence, even if this particular raised voice is benign. The person who brightens when given attention carries a history of neglect, even if this particular attention is trivial. The immediate context matters too. The person who is performing for an audience is different from the person who is alone with you. The person who is in their own territory is different from the person who is in yours. The person who has something to gain from you is different from the person who has nothing to gain and nothing to lose. These contextual factors do not invalidate the instant read. They inform it. They tell you what you are reading. The person as they are in this situation, which is the only person you can ever actually encounter. Time of day, physical state, recent events. All of these modify the signal. The person who is tired is more honest because they have less energy for performance. The person who is stressed is more reactive because their resources are depleted. The person who has just experienced something significant is still processing it. Their signals confused by the residue of recent intensity. The skilled reader takes these factors into account, not by calculating them deliberately, but by feeling them, by allowing the context to modify the perception without conscious intervention. The reader's own distortion. The deepest obstacle to reading others is the reader themselves. We do not see others as they are. We see them as we are. projected onto the screen of our own history, our own needs, our own unacknowledged desires. The person who is hungry for connection sees warmth where there is mere politeness. The person who is afraid of betrayal sees threat where there is mere reserve. The person who is competing sees rivalry where there is mere difference. This distortion is not a flaw to be eliminated. It is a condition to be managed. The skilled reader knows their own patterns of projection, has learned to recognize the moments when they are seeing themselves rather than the other person. This recognition is not achieved through introspection alone. It is achieved through the feedback of repeated interaction, through the gradual calibration of perception against reality, through the humbling process of being wrong and learning from it. The body of the reader is part of the instrument, your own breathing, your own posture, your own emotional state. These modify what you perceive. When you are anxious, you perceive threat more readily. When you are relaxed, you perceive openness more readily. Neither is more accurate. Both are partial. The skilled reader learns to notice their own state, to recognize how it colors perception, to adjust not by suppressing the coloration, but by acknowledging it. The desire to read others is itself a distortion. When you need to read someone, when you are afraid of what they might do, when you want something from them, when you are competing with them, your perception becomes instrumentally motivated. You see what serves your purpose rather than what is actually present. The most accurate reads happen when you do not need them, when you are genuinely curious rather than strategically invested, when the outcome does not matter to you. This is the paradox of the skill. The more you need it, the less reliable it becomes. The more you let go of the need, the more accurate your perception. The instant read is not a tool for getting what you want. It is a byproduct of presence, of genuine encounter, of the willingness to see another person without the overlay of your own agenda. The practice of seeing. Reading people instantly is not a talent. It is a practice. It develops through sustained attention to human presence, through the discipline of looking without immediately interpreting, through the patience to let patterns emerge over time. The practice begins with attention to your own experience. When you encounter someone, what do you feel in your body before you have time to think? The slight tension, the subtle relaxation, the attraction or repulsion that happens below conscious choice. These are your own responses and they are data. They may reflect the other person's state, or they may reflect your own history, or they may reflect the interaction between the two. The skilled reader does not dismiss these responses. They notice them, holds them lightly, allows them to inform without determining the perception. The next level of practice is attention to the other person's body as a whole before focusing on any particular feature. The gestalt of their presence, the overall impression of tension or ease, openness or closure, energy or depletion. This is often the most accurate read, the one that captures the person's state before they have begun to manage it. The details matter, but they matter as modifications of the whole, not as isolated signals. Then comes the discipline of delay. The instant read happens in an instant, but its verification takes time. The skilled reader holds the initial impression lightly, neither accepting it as truth nor dismissing it as projection. They allow subsequent interaction to confirm or modify the initial perception. They notice when the person contradicts their first impression, and they ask what this contradiction means. Is it evidence of deception, or of complexity, or of the reader's own initial error? The practice also involves exposure to variety. The person who has only known people like themselves reads difference as threat or deficiency. The person who has encountered many kinds of people, many cultural contexts, many ways of being human, develops a broader vocabulary of perception. They learn that direct eye contact means respect in one culture and challenge in another. They learn that silence means thoughtfulness in one person and hostility in another. They learn that the same signal can carry opposite meanings depending on context, and they become slower to judge, more nuanced in their reads. Finally, the practice requires the willingness to be wrong. The instant read is probabilistic, not deterministic. It captures tendencies, not certainties. The person who seems closed may be protecting deep vulnerability. The person who seems open may be performing transparency to conceal manipulation. The skilled reader holds their reads as hypotheses, not conclusions, and they revise them in the face of new information without feeling that their skill has failed. The ethics of seeing to read another person is to hold power. The knowledge you gain from instant perception can be used to help or to harm, to connect or to manipulate, to understand or to exploit. The skill itself is neutral. Its moral value depends on the intention behind it and the use to which it is put. The ethical reader uses their perception to meet the other person where they are. If they sense anxiety, they create safety. If they sense hostility, they do not escalate. If they sense openness, they respond with their own. The read is not a weapon. It is a bridge, a way of establishing contact that bypasses the defenses and speaks directly to the person beneath the performance. But the ethical reader also respects boundaries. Not everything you perceive should be acknowledged. Some vulnerabilities are visible precisely because the person cannot fully conceal them, and to name them is to violate the person's dignity. The skill of reading must be matched with the skill of discretion, the knowledge of when to see and when to look away, when to respond to what you perceive, and when to let it pass unremarked. The deepest ethical question is why you want to read others. If the desire comes from fear, from the need to protect yourself, to control situations, to prevent betrayal, then the skill will always be contaminated by that fear. You will read threat where it does not exist. You will see manipulation in genuine openness. You will create the very situations you are trying to prevent. If the desire comes from genuine interest in other people, from the pleasure of encounter, from the wish to understand and be understood, then the skill becomes something else entirely. It becomes the basis for authentic relationship, for the kind of meeting between souls that is rare and precious. The instant read in this context is not about advantage. It is about intimacy, about the recognition of another person in their full humanity, with all their complexity and contradiction. The limits of reading. There are limits to what instant perception can achieve. The read captures the surface, the immediate state, the person as they are in this moment. It does not access the depths, the history, the unconscious motivations that even the person themselves may not understand. It is a beginning, not an end, an opening rather than a conclusion. Some people are genuinely opaque, their signals so controlled or so contradictory that instant reading produces only confusion. This is not a failure of the skill. It is a feature of the person, a sign of either extraordinary self-mastery or extraordinary fragmentation. The skilled reader recognizes opacity without forcing interpretation, holds the not knowing as itself a kind of knowledge. Some people change. The read that is accurate today may be inaccurate tomorrow, as the person grows, heals, deteriorates, or simply responds to different circumstances. The skilled reader does not fix their perception in time. They allow for change, for surprise, for the fundamental unpredictability of human beings. And some truths are simply not available to perception, instant or otherwise. The person may not know their own motivations. They may be concealing something even from themselves. They may be responding to forces biological, psychological, historical that are invisible to any external observer. The skilled reader is humble about these limits. They do not claim to know what they cannot know. The integration. The ultimate skill is not reading others in isolation. It is reading the space between, the relationship that forms in the encounter, the third thing that is neither you nor them but the field of your interaction. This field has its own qualities, its own tension or ease, its own openness or closure, its own capacity for depth or superficiality. The skilled reader perceives not just the individual, but the dyad, the system that forms when two people meet. This systemic reading is the most complex and the most valuable. It tells you not just who the other person is, but who you become in their presence, what possibilities open or close, what the relationship itself is capable of becoming. Some people bring out your best self, others bring out your worst. The instant read, at its deepest, is the recognition of this potential, the sensing of what might happen if this encounter continues, the integration of all these levels, the body, the voice, the movement, the face, the context, the self, the ethical stance, the limits, the space between this is what produces the master reader. Not someone who is never wrong, but someone who is wrong less often, who corrects quickly, who holds their perceptions with the lightness that allows for revision. Not someone who controls others through knowledge, but someone who meets others through understanding. Not someone who sees through people, but someone who sees them fully in the instant of their appearing and responds with the wisdom that such seeing makes possible. The return to encounter. In the end, reading people instantly is not about technique. It is about presence. It is about the quality of attention you bring to the encounter, the willingness to be fully where you are, with whom you are, in the moment that is happening. The techniques are scaffolding. They support the development of the skill, but they are not the skill itself. The skill is the capacity to be present with another human being in a way that allows them to be seen. This presence is rare. Most of our encounters are partial, distracted, instrumental. We meet people while thinking about where we need to be next, while rehearsing what we want to say, while managing our own performance. We do not see the other person because we are not looking. We are looking at ourselves, at our needs, at our projections. The practice of instant reading is ultimately the practice of dropping these distractions, of coming into the encounter with empty hands and open perception. It is the discipline of setting aside your story, your needs, your fears, long enough to register what is actually present. And it is the courage to let what you see change you, to allow the encounter to be real rather than scripted, to risk the vulnerability of genuine meeting. When you can do this, when you can stand before another person and simply see them, without agenda, without defense, without the compulsion to interpret or control, something happens that is more valuable than any information you might gather. The other person feels seen, not judged, not analyzed, not managed, but recognized in their fundamental humanity. And in that recognition, something opens. The masks become less necessary. The performance relaxes. The possibility of authentic encounter emerges. This is the true purpose of reading people instantly, not to gain advantage, not to protect yourself, but to create the conditions for genuine human meeting in a world that desperately needs it. The skill is a means to an end, and the end is relationship, the real kind, the kind that happens when two people see each other clearly and choose to continue anyway. The train stops. The stranger rises. The meeting ends. The phone call concludes. But in that instant of encounter, something has happened that cannot be undone. You have seen and been seen. The quality of that seeing determines the quality of your life, moment by moment, encounter by encounter, until the final encounter that sums them all. Learn to see. The rest follows.